their mics off when they're not speaking. And we request the participants to put their questions in the Q&A section. And based on the time we will select and address them in our Q&A session. We also being recorded for militant purposes.
Thank you, Dhriti. Let me welcome everybody, all the panelists. We have a very distinguished set of panelists today, and all the attendees to this webinar that is being organized by UNEP and TERI. And, subnational actions becoming very, very important and is of relevance in the scenario. And, that's why we organize this around as we move towards the revision of the SAPCCs. How do we take this opportunity also to learn from some of the things that this current pandemic has taught us to build in a more robust subnational plan? I will begin with a very short context-setting presentation, and then I will hand it over to Rashmi sir and Atul sir for their opening remarks. I think we are all very well aware of the history, but I thought I'd quickly take you through, in 2008, as the National Action Plan on Climate Change was released, it was expected that the subnational authorities will play a key role. And it's in 2009 when the SAPCC processes were initiated, and 2010 when the National Consultation Workshop happened. And it's between the time frame of 2012 to 2014 when the first SAPCCs for all states and UTs were prepared and submitted. And, this was the first time that there was a very keen recognition of the role the states and the local governments have to actively play in incorporating climate considerations into their day-to-day governance, and how do you, look at both mitigation and adaptation into your policies, your programs, your regulations, and most importantly, your investment decisions. From the first SAPCCs, we learned that, at a national steering committee level, if there was an endorsement, it was an important milestone in developing decentralized climate policies in India. It had huge overlaps with the development discourse, especially with departments like agriculture, water, disaster management, health, forest, biodiversity, urban habitats. And the first set had a representation of 5 crucial elements, which were around the climate profile of the state, assessments of the vulnerability that the local context has in terms of climate change, your emissions and your energy needs, what would be a climate change strategy, and what would be an action plan. So, the elements were all in place when the states were asked to do this bottom-up exercise of how do we move forward. But as we went into the first phase, and now we have some lessons learning around it, while there were many good lessons that came up, and the states were getting involved and more aware of such things, a few challenges that emerged were that, the first thing was that there was a lack of understanding of how to conduct climate projections and vulnerability assessments. And, some of these revolve around downscaling models to your local context, understanding those variabilities, without which it's very difficult to understand where you are and assess the current state of play before you can start to put some action plans in place. There was a glaring lack of technical know-how, especially around how do you integrate this into your developmental processes. Most, in fact, I would say almost all plans that were submitted in the first go were not ready to act upon yet. And, there were many additional steps that need to be put in, to make them implementable or make them investment ready, and those sorts of things. Access to financial resources was an area of concern, both for involving the technical people who prepare the plans, and then to take it forward to actually implementing some of those actions. So these were some of the concerns that came up in the first one. Now, as we move to the second version, the new avatar, we have an opportunity to revamp. The guidelines are again submitted by MOEF. They are pretty robust again. The states and UTs are at different stages of revision right now, but time and resources still continue to remain as a challenge. There is an enhanced focus on adaptation and resilience and mentions around incorporating sectoral plans and investment plans, along with what are the linkages with India's nationally determined contributions that have been put forth in the UNFCCC. So, in this context, we have organized, Terry and UNEP put together today's event, and to hear from the key officials in the states who handle climate change things around certain of these key considerations. And, the four that I have put up here are: can SAPCCs be a tool for enhancement of national climate-related actions? How do we look at more integration through better role of science in scenario building? How do we increase the access to finance, especially for the implementation of the intervention? So there are two parts to it. How do we make sectoral plans and the SAPCCs more implementable? And then how do we look at exploring innovative ways to access finance, be it through markets, be it through business models and those kind of things? Obviously, there is a need to strengthen institutions to increase technical human capacities. And within the subnational space, there are multiple stakeholders. So how do we bring them all together? What is the role that cooperation within the subnational space can play to enhance national level achievements of goals or national ambition? So I would stop here and let me welcome you all again for today's webinar, and I will look forward to an interesting discussion over the next few hours. If I could invite Mr. Atul Bagai to give his opening remarks. Atul sir heads the UNEP country office in India. And sir, the floor is all yours.
Thank you, Karan. And I also wanted to thank Rashmi for inviting UNEP to be a partner in this very important webinar. In fact, webinar has now become a way of life, and there's so many of them coming out of the years that one has lost count. But I think from our perspective, we thought this particular webinar was certainly a very important one from a variety of perspectives. As Karan was saying, the fact that we are looking at a subnational perspective is really a very important perspective, which we need to look very closely. And the fact that we have 7 or 8 state governments today represented here is certainly a step in the right direction to talk to the state governments and to the relevant stakeholders there in regard to the state action plans. What has happened on state action plans during the phase 1 has brought very important lessons, and we are very happy that those lessons are being looked at during the phase 2 of the revisions that are happening. We've started our office about 3 years back, and it's about 2 years back that we started getting involved in this process. And I think one of the big lessons which we learned from the first phase and which we need to really address in this current phase is that SAPCC is not just a Department of Environment baby. I think at the state government, there has to be a realization that it has to be driven not only at the highest political management, but also it has to be a multidisciplinary approach, where it's not that the Department of Environment would lead certainly they would be leading the exercise, but the other departments which impinge upon environmental impact need to also realize that they have a very, very important role to play. And that is an aspect which I think needs to be strengthened further in this current phase of revisions that is going on. If the departments of power, if the departments of transport, if the departments of rural development at the state government level do not own the SAPCC, I don't think we would be in a position to come up with a document that actually not only presents the correct position at the state level, but also is able to contribute, as the last point which Karan says, contributing to the NDCs. And that linkage also needs to be established, which is not there, of how does the state government contribute to the overall NDC? What is the percentage contribution of a state government to that particular NDC? And I think that is a mechanism that needs to be brought together. A mechanism, for example, I'll give an example of what Niti Aayog is doing with SDGs. The indicator and the assessment framework they have set up for state governments is something which we need to adopt also for SAPCCs also. I'm very happy that we are having this conversation with the state governments. But I think what has happened in the last 5 months or 4 months, the pandemic, has actually twisted the whole SAPCC process, turned it around the head completely. And I think while we are revising the SAPCCs, we need to take this hard reality into account and see how we are integrating the lessons learned from this pandemic into our revision, which we are doing at various state government levels. And it would mean the emphasis on adaptation and resilience, certainly, but this whole focus on nature-based solutions will need to be integral to the SAPCCs. So I think there are some very good lessons that we are all learning. And finally, I think there is a need also, and I'm very happy Terry has taken this lead. There are 5 or 6 or 7 agencies at the central level who are helping 29 states and union territories to develop their SAPCCs. I think there is a need for a dialogue between these 7 or 8 agencies. Some kind of a platform is needed to get these organizations together to not only share their experiences and their methodologies, but also to see how we can all integrate our efforts, which can then build into the larger national NDC. Thanks a lot for inviting us, and I'm very thankful to Terry for giving us this opportunity.
Thank you very much, sir. And we are also indeed very proud to partner with UNEP on this endeavor. And, you know, we are also in partnership with UNEP assisting UTs of Chandigarh and Puducherry in the region. And I'm also glad to welcome, you know, in the attendees, representatives from other states and MOEF also. Sir, Rashmi sir, you know, can I hand it over to you for your opening remarks?
Thank you, Karan. And once again, let me join hands with add my voice to Atul for complimenting all of you and the UNEP team for organizing this webinar on State Action Plan on Climate Change. And this is really a significant moment because I remember about 5 years ago, we had, when I was a part of the ministry, we had organized in coordination with UNDP a seminar on how to assist the state governments in preparing the state action plans. And I haven't heard since then any agency having taken a lead in taking this work forward. Of course, there are many others, many agencies which are helping the state governments, but nothing at the, at a coordinating level where all the stakeholders are together. So I would compliment UNEP for having taken this lead and supporting Terry in organizing and getting all the stakeholders together particularly those who represent the state governments and are at the helms of affairs in drafting and implementing such state action plans. Now, Mr. Atul Bagai had pointed out a very important fact that the state action plans are a vehicle for involving the states in implementing the climate policy. And this, we need to understand the significance of this important fact. So far, the entire policy making at the national level has focused on providing resources and mechanisms to the central government agencies. Even today, although the state governments had been tasked with evolving an action plan at the state level way back in 2010, even now there is currently no effective mechanism of providing resources or capacities at the state government level to implement such a plan. And so the moment has arrived that we really have a review of what we have in place in the states to implement those actions which can help climate, which can help the national state economies, and address the vulnerabilities, and at the same time meet the global goals. When the first phase of state action plans were implemented, the state governments treated this as some kind of a new program, and that was essentially the problem in which we all got trapped, because an action plan for addressing climate change was looked at as a primary instrument for accessing larger resources from the central government as a standalone developmental scheme. As Atul has pointed out, what all of us need to understand is that climate change is a multi-sectoral concern, and it has to be located or anchored in the respective sectoral developmental plans. It cannot be a standalone activity. Climate change affects all sectors in different ways, and an action plan to address climate change has to be owned by the concerned departments. So what is needed is actually to mainstream the climate change concerns, the capacities in the respective sectoral plans. And the state governments are now increasingly realizing this, that it is access to resources is one issue, but equally important is that the risks arising from climate change are seen as genuine risks for each of the sectoral developmental activity. So how do we do this at the state level? We have developmental schemes aimed at improving water resources, constructing roads, improving road connectivity, poverty, and addressing the livelihood questions, addressing the rural developmental concerns. So all of these sectoral policies need to internalize the climate risks and accordingly make a provision of the resources in their sectoral plans. This is the biggest challenge in the second version of the state action plans on climate change that are being prepared. So if we compare with the first version of the state action plans, there are some things which are new and some things which are a continuation of the old parameters, but there is an improvement there. So I'll just recount 5 of them. First is the mainstreaming concern, which I have just described. It is important for the state governments to realize that climate risks need to be internalized and anchored in the sectoral development plans for any action plan to be successful. This is a completely new way of looking at action plans. Second is that the action plan has to also have a clear financing roadmap. In the first version, the states simply estimated the total financial requirement arising from sectoral strategies. But what is needed in the second version is to convert them into specific projects and activities which can be financed either from the developmental budget of the state governments of their own, or they can find resources from outside the budget. And this will need, of course, action plan, action-oriented projects and activities. And this is, again, something which is totally new, which is not there in the first version of the state action plans. The third thing, which is partially present in the old version of the plans, but will need to be clarified and with greater degree of certainty in the new version, is the monitoring and evaluation mechanism. There is, in the past, the entire monitoring and evaluation process of the state action plan has focused on the financial deliverables. If a certain level of expenditure is met, it is regarded as having met the objective. But that is not how a climate action plan can actually look at the final deliverable. We need to see what are the clear indicators in the way an action is looked at. An indicator-based monitoring and evaluation process will have to be devised and included in the state action plans. This is also important because they have to find enough financial resources from outside the budget. And any extra budgetary financing support will look at the kind of monitoring and evaluation framework which the state governments have. So this is important, not just from a measurement perspective, from the perspective of ascertaining the effectiveness of the action plans, but also from finding the financing resources from the agencies which might be interested in supporting the state action plan. The fourth thing, again, which is, I would say, partially it was present in the first version, but with a greater clarity we will need to put in place in the new version, is the institutional mechanism for coordinating the plans and delivering these plans. Most often, the one or two departments which have been put in charge of implementing the climate action plans at the state level do not have either access to the sectoral data or inputs, or the resources, and then this is coming in the way of an effective implementation. Even if we form a state level steering committee, unless the sectoral developmental agencies own up these action plans and become a part of decision making process, the action plan is not going to succeed. So we will need to innovate on the institutional mechanism in a way that institutions at the sectoral level get embedded in the decision making process, and they own it up as their take it up as their own action plan, rather than something as a result of a top-down process. So state action plans actually have to be created and drafted in a bottom-up process, and then coordinated at the state level through a properly constituted institutional mechanism. It is not necessary for this institutional mechanism to consolidate all the resources in one pool and then provide it to the respective agencies. The resource allocation can happen differently through the sectoral development plans, but an institutional process of coordinating allocations or utilization of those resources is a key activity. And last but not the least, the SDG goals. When the state action plans were initiated, or I would say even when the National Action Plan on Climate Change was initiated, the SDGs goals were nowhere in sight. It all happened in 2015. But so it is important, and then they are an overriding priority for the global community as well as for the government at the center, and also for the state governments. there is a ranking of the states prepared frequently by the Niti Aayog. So we will need to find adequate linkages between the SDG goals, their delivery mechanisms, and the state action plans. And a methodology will need to be put in place to ensure that when the state governments implement the action plans, they also contribute to these sustainable developmental goals. And this will then validate the resource allocation for the state action plans. In the absence of a clear linkage between the SDGs and state action plans, the state agencies which are entrusted with the responsibility of implementing these action plans will find it very difficult to access resources. So this is another reason why we need to establish this linkage. I think this is in brief the challenge before the state authorities when they prepare the state action plans, and I wish them well. Many of them are present here, and we look forward to learning from their experiences and also helping them in clarifying the choices which they have to make in their decisions. Thank you very much, and over to you, Karan. Karan, I have concluded, so you can take over.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes. Yes, Dhriti?
I think Karan is having a network issue. We can begin with our first session, which is on aligning SAPCCs with developing priorities. And the first session is Mr. Lakshmi. So you can take the panel.
Okay. Okay. Thank you, Dhriti. And this takes us to the second part of our discussion today, where we will have a panel discussion on aligning the state action plans on climate change with the development priorities. And each of the states which are drafting and implementing the state action plans have different priorities depending on their vision for development, the level of achievement of their sustainable developmental goals, and their own vision about what they can contribute to climate change efforts. And we have panelists, a number of panelists today to discuss these issues. We have two representatives from the state government and one representative from International Development Financing Institution. And lastly, we have a research associate from TERI who will be giving their own version of what they look at the alignment of the climate change action plans with the priorities of the development. We have four panelists. The first one who is present here is Mr. Deepak Kumar Singh. He is an IAS officer of 1992 batch. He is currently the Principal Secretary of the Department of Environment, Forest and Climate Change in the government of Bihar. Mr. Singh has also been the Principal Secretary of the Labor Resources Department and the CEO of the Bihar Skill Development Mission. He has also been the Secretary of the Water Resources Department and has held the charge of Secretary Bihar State Electricity Board. So he has held multiple positions, key positions in the government of Bihar, and many of them have very close linkages with the implementation of the action plans. For example, the energy, the water, the skill development. So let me welcome him and invite him to give his views on what he thinks the challenges of development in Bihar are, and how does he think that the concerns of climate change can be mainstreamed into these developmental priorities for a state like Bihar, which has a which is one of the states which have serious developmental challenges. It will be a pleasure to listen to you. So over to you, Mr. Deepak Kumar.
Uh, uh, Good morning, sir. Am I audible?
Yeah, you're audible.
Yes.
Okay. Good morning, and thank you to both Terry and UNEP for inviting me in this panel discussion in this webinar on the subnational action plan on climate change. Uh, The first thing which I have been in this department, but this is my second tenure in this department. I was secretary of this department from 2011 to 2014 also, when the first action plan was made. And then I have again taken over charge last year. This is my second posting in the department, when I found out that the revised action plan on climate change was being prepared. And it was in fact sent also, a draft was sent also to Government of India, but we have withdrawn it, and we are again in the process of revising it, and we have requested UNEP to help us in revising it. The first thing which comes to our mind, which was in the when we had prepared the first plan also and in the second plan also, is that when we present that plan, or when we prepare that plan to the departments, because there are at least 10 to 15 departments which have to in a coordinated manner implement it, and also feel a stake in preparing it. Now when we prepare that action plan, or when we present a draft, we find that most of the departments, they do not find any interest, they do not take any interest either in preparing the plan. They think that, as it has already been told by Mr. Atul Bagai sir also and Mr. R. Rasmi sir also, that they think that it's a baby of basically the climate change department, environment, forest and climate change department. So they don't take that much of interest in preparing it, and even when it is presented, then also they take it in a very routine manner. Now I don't blame them, because I have been also to many departments, as in now it's in 28 years of service, I have served many departments. Every department has their own priorities, and obviously they would think that climate change is not their priority. So the first and foremost thing is to present the need for a climate change action plan in words which can be appreciated by other departments like agriculture or transport or energy or urban development. They should think that it is part of their own developmental plan, and it is not something which is being thrust upon them as an extra thing apart from their own developmental activity. So that is the first thing. So in that, it was rightly said that the willpower has to come from very top, but unfortunately in the government, the top person also has different priorities. They have vast amount of priorities, and climate change is certainly not uh, the top priority, or even one of the top 5 priorities. So the first thing is, for the Government of India or for the organizations like UNEP and TERI, the challenge for them is to present the need for a climate change action plan and the need for countering climate change in such a manner that every department can appreciate it. Currently, it seems as if it is only a baby of the scientists, some amount of scientists who are doing research on climate change. one or the other paper will come which will say that the temperature will increase, then this will happen, or the extreme events are increasing, and like that. The second point is that when I saw the first climate change action plan, also that time I was new to the department, and certainly I can't say that I have much contributed in that action plan. Even in the second action plan, when I joined the department, it was already prepared. But what I felt was that when we are preparing the action points or when we are preparing the strategy, we have to understand that it is not the IAS or any other services top officers sitting at the head of the department who are going to implement it. It has to be implemented by people at a very low level who do not have that kind of understanding of climate change as the people sitting in this webinar have. So we have to present that action plan or the strategy in such words that our people working at the block level, people working at the farm level, people working at the subdivisional level can understand that, and they can identify themselves with that action plan. So that I think is the second important point which I would like to present, is that we have to make the action plans really actionable points and not just some jargon of words, so that it is not understood by anybody else other than the secretary of the department. And that is why the action plans, they do not actually, they are implemented. Third, I agree that climate change finance is not an important part of the whole strategy, because many of the things, many of the policy changes which are required under the climate change action plan or for countering climate change are part of the policies which we are maybe already implementing, and they just need a certain kind of policy shift which in all cases do not require a financing. The fourth point which I would like to point out is that while we are talking in this webinar about the subnational action plan on climate change, we have to also appreciate that there are certain changes in the mindset. I am repeating it again, in the mindset, which has to come from the national level. Now, if in the name of developmental work, we are going to cut all the roads, all the roadside trees which were planted maybe 100 years ago or 200 years ago by people who were certainly not less intelligent than we are. And those engineers or those executing agencies do not think twice before cutting an 80-year-old or 100-year-old tree. They do not have any idea how much carbon sequestration that old tree does. They simply have a mathematical idea that you can cut a tree and you can plant 10 plants in place of that, without thinking that there is 1,000 times of difference between an 40-year or 50-year-old tree, the amount of eco services which it provides, and between 100 plants which we plant now, even 1,000 plants which we plant now, maybe I don't know how many of them will actually become trees. So, although we have in theory a green highways policy, we have in theory a policy of cutting less and less trees, but in practice, in last 28 years, I have not seen a single project, road project or linear project, not only road, any other linear project in Bihar, in which the engineer or the implementing department has any concern about saving the trees. It is only since the last year when we tried to adopt a policy of not allowing any tree to be cut, then they have at least started thinking, but there is still a vast, large gap in their thinking and what should be actually done. The second thing is about the rejuvenation of rivers. I don't want at this forum to comment on any of the national policy, but what I feel is that in the name of rejuvenation of rivers, in the name of rejuvenation of Ganga, in the name of Ganga Action Plan, what we have actually done is preparing some ghats and beautification of the banks of the river. We have to realize that the banks of the river are not the river. The river is actually the water which flows in the river. If we stop the water, if we make the water completely unusable by putting all the sewage of the towns in that, and then we just beautify the ghat, we are not rejuvenating the river. So this is also the second important thing. When we are talking about climate change, we have to talk about forests, we have to talk about trees, we have to talk about rivers. These are an important and very important component of the whole ecosystem in which the humanity is surviving. So this is the second thing which has to come from the top. The urban development department doesn't have any priority of the stopping the sewage which is going into. They have the priority of building ghats, building roads, building other urban infrastructure. This comes last in the priority. I'm not saying it as a general statement. I'm talking only about Bihar. So uh, finally, I will not take much time. My point would be number one is that there has to be certain issues, for example, about river rejuvenation, about forest. Recently, I learned about, I don't know whether that project has actually gone through, but there is an hydroelectric project in somewhere in Northeast in which more than 2 lakh hectares of rich biodiversity, rich forest is being destroyed. I don't know what kind of development this is, but there are certain things which has to come from the national level, from the top level. That is my point number one. Second point is that we certainly need an effort to make it the other departments understand that they are as much part of the climate change action strategy, and it is not only the baby of the forest environment and climate change department. The third and most important thing is that we have to demystify the SAPCC document. Sometimes I myself is unable to understand that document when I read it. We have to demystify the document and we have to make it a document which our village level workers, which our block level workers who are not more than intermediate or simple graduates, they can understand that. Only then we can actually think of and we can succeed in implementing the climate change action plan. Thank you very much. I would once again thank Atul Bagai sir and R.R. Rasmi sir for giving me this opportunity. Thank you very much. Over.
Thank you, Deepak. Thank you so much for giving us a perspective based on your experience of drafting and implementing action plan in Bihar. And you have rightly said that one of the key things which we need to do is to demystify the language and the terminology of the state action plans. We tend to make it overly scientific so that it becomes unintelligible to the people at the ground level. So in the planning process, it is also important how we convey and communicate our concerns to the people who are tasked with taking actions at the ground level. So this will certainly be very, very important. And political ownership of the entire process of implementing the action plans. Thank you very much for your description of the key challenges. I would you did talk about how it is not so important that we look at financial resources, additional resources all the time for implementing an action plan. What is important is that the departments which are involved in implementing the action plan, they become the owners of the process and they use their existing resources to achieve the deliverables. I would just, before I invite the second speaker, I wanted to ask a question. You have also the experience of handling a water resources department in your state. How do you think the risks arising from climate change can be internalized in a project aimed at improving your water resources? Or you take an example of any important project that you have implemented and if you can guide us in that, maybe it will be a good lesson for other states as
well. Yeah. Number one is that I have worked in the water resources department for about 1.5 years. And as I told you, in the context of the linear project of road department, similarly, in the water resources department also, the engineers think that the only way of countering climate change, because the climate change most important ramification for the water resources department in the context of Bihar is flood and drought, of course, the groundwater, the lowering of groundwater. Now, they think that the only way in which the floods can be controlled is by making embankments. Now, that is the strategy which we have been following since last 70 years after independence. It's a long debate. Certainly, it's not an issue which can be discussed in that webinar. But I am personally of the view that by making embankments, we are only advancing the problem 25 years ahead. Similarly, as in the corona, by way of lockdown, we are simply making the curve rise after 30 days instead of rising it now. So in the same way, they think that only by making embankments they can control the flood. Whereas my view is that instead of making embankments everywhere, the strategy should be to protect the habitations only by making embankments and not to embank the whole river, rather than try to find the natural gradient to spread its water into the field and into what in Bihar we call chor. It is actually wetlands, the old wetlands which are all drying because we have embanked the rivers. So it is in the natural way to let the water spread into the wetlands. And there are, for example, Kosi and Gandak. They are two main rivers arising from starting from Nepal, which creates havoc in Bihar. In Kosi, the actual Kosi river has shifted almost 100 kilometers in last 300 years, and there are many old courses of Kosi which are still there, called Kali Kosi, Pili Kosi, and many other names. I have many times suggested the water resources department that you should try to revive this, and when we have more water in the main Kosi river, then by controlled release of that water through structures, we can release it into the old courses. That way, not only the pressure on the main embankment and the main river will come down, but the water will spread, and it will also help in the groundwater recharge also. So this, in my way, is there is a need of a wider debate at the national level and rethinking some of the strategies of development which we are following as far as linear development projects and as far as water resources project is concerned. I was aghast when for the first time it was thought that we would make Ganga a national waterway, and it was proposed that we would build small barrages at every 1 kilometer so that we can get the necessary draft and ships can move. I mean, it is simply torturing the river, and I don't want to use that word, but if I am pardoned, then it is akin to raping the river if you are making an embankment or barrages at every 1 kilometer in a river. So there is a need of rethinking some major strategies at the national level. Thank you. Thank
very
you.
good, very good. Thank you very much, Deepak. Thank you for outlining the issue with such greater clarity. So this is one good example of how the climate concerns can be mainstreamed in the sectoral developmental plans. And here we will need to alter the entire strategy. We cannot remain satisfied only with the engineering solutions. This is what Deepak is emphasizing. We need to rethink the entire strategy here. So the next panelist, which I have today with us, is Mr. Kalamegham, who is the nodal officer of the climate change cell in the Puducherry government. Presently, he is an environmental engineering in the Department of Science, Technology and Environment of the government of Puducherry. And as nodal officer, he is responsible for preparing, implementing, and monitoring the action plan of climate change. And he is currently deep into the process of making it with the help of UNEP and other agencies. So let me invite Mr. Kalamegham to share with us his experiences and his approach.
Good morning. Thank you all for giving me this opportunity to participate in this wonderful webinar and represent the views of Government of Puducherry on subnational action plan. Puducherry, as you know, is a classic example at subnational level for unity in diversity. We have diverse landforms, like we are spread apart in 4 regions. We have one region called Yanam in Andhra, one region called Mahe in Kerala, and 2 regions spread apart within Tamil Nadu. And we have diverse language, diverse geomorphological settings, diverse economic sectors on which we rely upon. The one thing which unites us is the French connection and the coastal setting. All the 4 regions are in coastal areas. All are small coastal towns that way much vulnerable for the climate change. Both physical aspects of climate change, like sea level rise, shoreline changes, coastal erosion, and temperature-induced heat stress, droughts. So all these factors are affecting us, apart from the fact that our economic activities are depending upon climate-sensitive sectors like agriculture, fisheries, tourism. These are some of the sectors which we more depend upon. Therefore, addressing the climate change risks posed and developing a state-level action plan is very important to us. And when we prepared the first state-level action plan in 2013, like all states, we were of the impression that we can develop some projects and obtain funds from the central government. So that way, almost most of the action points, like around 171 action points were there to a plan extent of about 1,400 crores. And mostly we depended that for the implementation action plan, we depended upon funds from the central government, like around we had only some around 200 crores fund which could be provided by the state government, and the balance 1,200 crores were supposed to be sourced from central government or other institutions. So because of that, the implementation of the action plan, first action plan, was not to a satisfactory extent. Though we were able to source some funds from the central government for certain projects like rejuvenation of water bodies. Under National Adaptation Fund, we were able to get some funds and we were able to take the project. For most of our other standard projects which were designed, like they could not be implemented in the right manner. So learning from that experience, now we are in the process of preparing the SAPCC 2. And we are glad that we have tied up with UNEP and Terry for this purpose. And now that while revising this SAPCC, the plan should be in synergy with the existing developmental priorities of the government of Puducherry and in synergy with the various sectoral ongoing activities and future projects that the departments, the sectors proposes. And also, we had requested UNEP and Terry to give us a roadmap on accessing the required finance for the priority actions that are identified under the SAPCC. This will help us to access the necessary financial resources for implementing the project. And one of the big challenge in this SAPCC2 is the requirement for planning for a period of 10 years from 2020 to 2030. So that involves a lot of forethought from the various sectoral agencies. And that is one of the important challenge which we have to overcome. And another thing is there should be a quite resilient policy at the state level, which is mostly lacking. So this climate policy should be an overall umbrella framework under which the various action points or the climate proof actions should be evolving. But this kind of policy framework is lacking. So that should be also be a part of this action plan. And another thing which I would like to suggest for all the states and at the national level is the monitoring and enforcement. For monitoring purpose, we need to have climate change action plan management system or a web-based monitoring tool, which will restore the various activities that are prioritized at national level, the targets, and the various activities and targets that are prioritized by the states, and the constant progress achieved at the national level and the state level should be constantly uploaded in this particular toolbox or the website, a web-based management system, so that there could be a proper monitoring at all levels.
Okay.
And I would also like to say that, like, for these prioritized actions at the state level for UT of Puducherry, we are concentrating more on the water bodies development in a traditional manner, and renewable energy sources like solar and e-transport mobility plan. So those are the areas we are focusing on right now.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Kalamegam. Thank you for pointing out the key areas of concern of the state government of Puducherry, and you have referred to the need of the state action plan being looked at as a policy framework by all the departments, so that they do change their developmental projects and according to the climate change concerns and internalize these risks. Thank you very much for pointing out.
And one more thing, like each projects or project reports prepared by the sectors, climate change outcomes should be a part of those DPRs. And I don't think most of the financial institutions are not insisting on this. The financial institutes should insist that in whatever DPR they're getting for financial loans or sanctions, climate proofing of the project of climate change adaptation mitigation should be incorporated into those DPRs. That way, all the departments will have an interest.
Yeah, thank you. This is an important aspect of the monitoring and evaluation framework. So let me now move to the third speaker, Mr. Ashish Chaturvedi, who is the Director of the Climate Change for GIZ India, and he is a specialist in climate change mitigation and adaptation, waste management, sustainable consumption, production, and environmental policy. He is a senior advisor with the GIZ, and in this role, he has interacted with various ministries and departments of the government of India at various levels, and he has helped them implement projects in the areas of climate change and associated fields. So let me welcome Mr. Chaturvedi, and we would be look forward to hearing your views. I would just like to stress that we have about 15 minutes available with us, in which we have to conclude this panel discussion and then invite some questions as well. So over to you, Mr. Chaturvedi.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thanks very much, UNEP and Kerry, for inviting us. I usually I'm used to these situations where sort of we have to really be precise in terms of our communication. So I have 4 points, and I'll sort of hopefully I'll be able to finish fairly quickly. So my first point, and which kind of emanates from what I've heard also already mentioned, I think our experience of working with more than 18 states draft the first version of the state action plans on climate change, and with now almost 10 states working with their state action plans on climate change right now, I think over the last 10 years, and sort of especially since 2013-14, there are significant capacities at the local level which have emerged in dealing with this sort of dialogue on climate policies. And I think this is something which gives me great joy that we've been part, and I think a lot of other agencies have been a part of this journey in strengthening capacities at the subnational level. Of course, there are huge amounts of variations. So you can sort of, if you talk to people in one part of the country as compared to other, there would be a completely different level of understanding, and that's also driven by political priorities at the state level. So in some states, the priorities, climate and environmental issues are definitely a high priority. And of course, the Himalayan region is one such example where there is an incredible amount of understanding and a very high political priority for sort of these issues. And I think that's something which, of course, drives the agenda at the sort of levels below. Having said that, I think we also realized fairly quickly that the state action plan on climate change can't be one standalone document. I think the representative from Bihar was talking about it. Of course, what you can make intelligible to a local block level representative cannot be the same document which you say as a policy document at the state level. So the state action plan on climate change needs to be have different versions. So it has to have guidelines, it has to have templates for implementation, it has to have a version which is a short version for policymakers and elected representatives. So I think there are multiple sort of versions of the state action plan on climate change which have to be tailored to the requirements and needs of different actors who are going to be involved in implementing it, as well as kind of rolling it out. The second point, my second point is about the alignment with developmental priorities. It has been mentioned a couple of times already. Of course, it's very important to identify what are the key developmental priorities and how do you actually embed the climate related topics and climate related challenges into those key developmental priorities. The link to this SDGs, which was mentioned by Mr. Rashmi in his introductory remarks, we're actually working with 2 states right now, two states in a fairly integrated manner, where we're actually aligning everything that they're doing to their Vision 2030 document as a part of their state action plan on climate change. So they have the Vision 2030 document, which is sort of monitored at the Chief Minister's office level. And what we're trying to do is sort of look at the monitoring and evaluation framework for the state action plan as kind of alignment with the Vision 2030 document. And in Uttar Pradesh, it's fairly well advanced. They have a fairly well-defined sort of framework for the monitoring of Goal 13, and they have indicators already defined. So I think it's possible to align these different monitoring frameworks one to the other. And some work that we started already in the previous phase of our cooperation with the Government of India, we've already developed a template which looks at how the state action plans on climate change are contributing to the SDGs at the national level. So we would be really excited and happy to share that with sort of everybody who's interested. So all the states that we were working with, we've already applied that template, and it would be great to actually share that with Atul, you and your team, to kind of put that sort of agenda at the forefront as well. So they're bringing these the SDG discussion and the climate discussion much more aligned. The third part is about integration into the third point is about integration into developmental planning. A senior level bureaucrat at one of the states where we were working in said very clearly, so he asked me, he was traveling with me, and he said, Ashish, please tell me, where exactly does the SAPCC have an impact on my planning as well as my financing? How does my financing change? How does my planning change? And if that doesn't get affected, then all of this is hoo-ha. All of this is just nice to have a document. But if there is no this sort of impact on how my project is getting planned and how my project is getting financed, then all of this development of the state action plan on climate change is actually not going to be very useful. So I think it's very critical to identify how does the planning of a particular project in the water sector change with the introduction of the climate concerns. What is the impact of the local level planning? What is the impact on the structures which are being made? What is the impact on the financing, additional financial resources that are being made? Now, if that is not made very clear, then all of what we do is not going to, and this is something that we know for very long from the work that is happening at the local level in agriculture, in MG Narega, as well as in water resources, that if those processes are not clearly defined in terms of financing and planning, then we were not going to hit make too many inroads. And linked to that is what Mr. Kalamegam just said. How are the projects being how does a developmental banking institution like NABARD approve the DPRs? Does it actually have a climate risk screening tool? Now, this is something that we're actually working with NABARD on as well. And I think this would be another point where one could really see how the proposals which are being approved by the developmental banks, how are they actually being using a climate risk screening tool as well before the projects are approved. And this would also have an implication on what kind of crops are given credit and what kind of infrastructure is given approval for developmental financing. So I think a risk screening, a climate risk screening tool would be eminently usable and useful at the subnational level as well. And my final point is about creating platforms at the subnational level which bring these different kinds of expertise together. So of course, the State Department of Environment is the nodal agency in most cases, but we also know that there are much stronger departments, either in terms of financial resources or in terms of their political influence at the state level. And it's really important to actually strengthen the capacities of the state environment departments and also bring other actors on board. And I think that's where we can use the structuring of multi-stakeholder platforms which focus on climate and SDG. One can actually create those kinds of platforms which bring the climate and SDG agenda together at the state level and bring different parties, different ministries together. And I think this will also allow us to actually have a much more diversified, much more distributed sense of monitoring and evaluation as well. Another point that Mr. Rashmi had raised, and we're actually doing a lot of work in that domain also with our state partners, and we would be really interested in sharing those experiences bilaterally and in larger groups as well. So that's it from my side. Thank you, Mr. Rashmi.
Thank you, Ashish. Thank you very much for being precise and very focused in your intervention. You have actually hit upon the substantive issues which are going to actually determine the character of the new version of the state action plans and their effectiveness. Thank you very much. The last panelist which I have today is a colleague from Delhi itself, Ms. Aishwarya Raj, who will be, she's currently researching with the Center for Global Environmental Research and working on several themes pertaining to climate policy, SDGs, and the state action plans. So can I invite her to give our presentation, be brief with it so that we can give some time, 2 or 3 minutes for the questions.
Yeah. Thank you, sir. I'll try to keep it very brief, and I'll just be sharing my screen so that everyone can see the presentation. Can you see it? Because I'm trying to share it here.
Yeah, it's coming up.
Okay, it is? Okay, great. So, okay. So yeah, good afternoon, everyone. It was very interesting to hear the insights that our esteemed panelists shared prior to me, because the theme for today's panel discussion is SAPCCs and its alignment with development, my presentation would essentially focus on SDGs because recently at TERI, we had conducted a study on mainstreaming development and enhancing climate resilience. And as a part of the same study, we also try to examine the linkages that SAPCCs can have with SDGs, and therefore how that could be manifested effectively for governance and policy making at the subnational level. So I'll try to make it very quick. And I know there are many SDGs, so at any point, if you have any questions and you find it a bit overwhelming, please feel free to ask me. Can everybody see the second slide?
Yeah.
Okay, just wanted to confirm. So just to give a background to why we are thinking of aligning SAPCCs, I think all of us already have an idea. Because SAPCCs have a risk-based perspective, they're capable of mainstreaming climate concerns in developmental planning. And similarly, because SAPCCs have a local contextualization influence, they're tailored to be effective in contributing to climate action plans and developmental strategies at the most decentralized levels. So SAPCCs can offer unique opportunities for achieving multiple benefits in the form of climate change resilience, mitigation, and also, of course, developmental planning and policy. Now that the Ministry of Environment has given all the states some time to revise their SAPCCs, this is an opportune time to think of how we can integrate sustainable development, the goals therein, the targets therein, and mainstream it with the strategies present in the SAPCCs. As you've already discussed, and I think Rashmi sir has also highlighted, that we need to have a bottom-up approach and strengthen it. And if we try to integrate the two by seeing the potential SDGs that can be integrated with the SAPCC interventions, it will help in resolving a number of issues which the SAPCCs are currently plaguing, which we've seen in the context setting presentation by Karan. And therefore, it would be quite an optimistic view. So now, how are SDGs placed in the SAPCC narrative? We already know what SAPCCs are, so I'm not going to describe that again. But because they are navigating across climate vulnerabilities and estimating future projections, they're also highlighting the sectoral implications on climate change for various sectors like health, water, agriculture, energy, forestry, just to name a few. They are, by their very nature, firstly running parallel to SDG 13, which is on climate action itself, but also to a number of other SDGs, like you can see on the screen. SDG 6, which is essentially on water, 7, which is essentially on energy, 9 on industries and infrastructure, 11 on sustainable habitats. Then also on responsible consumption and production, which is SDG 12, and as well as on SDG 14, which talks about coastal ecosystems, essentially, and SDG 15, which talks about forestry and biodiversity. So they're all present in the sectoral strategies that are there in SAPCCs and are priority sectors for these states. So they are inherently congruent and they're already present. So there is great scope for bringing in SDGs at a larger length and scope. So in our study, we did a content analysis and rapid assessment to map out what is the trend of SDGs and their linkages with the SAPCCs and their strategies, an overview of which has been given in this figure. So as you can see that certain SDGs had a stronger match or had a linkage with many of these SAPCC interventions for all the 33 SAPCCs. So SDG 2, which talks about food security and agriculture, SDG 6, which is on water, clean water and sanitation, 7 on energy, sustainable habitat, and 13, which was on climate action itself, and also 17, which is on partnerships for action. Here on SDG 17, what we looked at was capacity building and skill building, which is one of the targets in SDG 17, and which SAPCCs have time and again reiterated in their narratives. So these were the SDGs which found a very prominent linkage. Then it was also interesting to note that automatically, I think some of the interventions, if states have or they start practicing, for example, if I take the case of Sikkim, which has organic farming and is very much known for that. So simultaneously, it would cross-cut and intersect with many SDGs, apart from, of course, being climate, climate-proof in a sense. So it will align with having food security and sustainable agriculture, which is SDG 2. It would also meet the kind of targets that are set out in SDG 3, which is pertaining to health, to the water sector, which is SDG 6. Decent work and economic growth, which is SDG 8. So like this, there are many more, but I'm just outlining a few. So this is also a co-benefit that you are having a strategy in SAPCC, which is having a co-benefit with SDG, but not just one, multiple SDGs. Now, just as an observation, we observed that SDGs which were pertaining to education, which is 4, gender equality, which is 5, decent work and economic growth, which is 8, and coastal ecosystems and marine life. Sorry, I'm so sorry. I'll just go on talking. You can, I think by mistake something was pressed. Please give me 1 minute and I'll go back to the slide. Yeah. So some of these SDGs, which I have mentioned, they did not find a very prominent linkage. And some of it does make sense because, you know, if we see the SDGs which had a strong linkage, they are connected to the NAPCC missions, and SAPCCs are derived from NAPCC missions. So, you know, the NAPCC mission on solar mission would correspond to SDG 7 on energy, and therefore it's present in the SAPCC. Similarly, on energy efficiency, the national mission on sustainable agriculture. So that is the reason why almost all the SAPCCs found a linkage with these SDGs, which basically means that they potentially also scored or have the potential for developing more in these areas and for these targets, and while the others did not. Especially with, I think, SDG 14, not every state will have a coastal ecosystem, so naturally all the SDGs will not align with that. Just to very quickly take you through SDG Index 2019-2020, because this gives shed some light into how the Indian states have performed according to NITI Aayog's index in SDGs. It gives a score out of 100. There were a number of states, like you can see in the front runners classification, like Kerala, Himachal Pradesh, and many more, which scored very high. In fact, Kerala and Chandigarh were the highest scorers among the states and UTs, especially in some sectors. Like Kerala did very well on health, on industry and infrastructure. Chandigarh, on the other hand, did very well on a number of sectors like food and agriculture, water and economic growth, sustainable habitat, sustainable consumption and production. But it was surprising to see that both these states did not score very highly on SDG 13, which is on climate action. In fact, a number of other states, as you can see, the front-runner states for SDG 13 on the left-hand side box, though those states did better than these two states, and Lakshadweep scored a perfect score of 100. There were many other states which were lagging behind. They did not have a score of 50 out of 100 even. So there is a need to probably focus on this and improve. The key here is to understand that what was the indicator? What were the parameters that this index used to kind of rank these states? And if we look at SDG 13 only, there were a number of indicators, as you can see on the right-hand side box. So it talks about adaptive capacity. It talks about morbidity due to extreme climate. What is the reduction in the emissions intensity of GDP, and also aligning itself to the NDC goals, and how many states would probably have thought of including climate change as a module in academia. Some of the states like Chhattisgarh and Telangana did do this, that they integrated climate science into the academia as a module. But I think that if we look at these indicators, and apart from other things, of course, it would help the states in kind of upgrading their interventions in a manner that simultaneously they fulfill their developmental goals, which are sustainable. Yes, okay. And then they can probably do this. So just to conclude, this is actually my last slide. You can just, understand that there are many co-benefits, so we can use that in a cost-effective manner. And then you have best practices, as we've seen in the case of Gujarat's solar panel projects over canals, which has happened since 2012. So you can take that into account. And I think sound policy making at the subnational levels in certain sectors, like I've already written here, that can be really helpful, especially as seen in the aspirational districts program, which is a very good program. And then, of course, some modalities of how to operationalize cooperative federalism and competitive federalism, as NITI Aayog releases a lot of indices, and we've already discussed how states at their level can make it better. So I think if you just align all of these things, states will have a good amount of self-assessment and try to integrate the two in a very coherent manner. So that's it. Thank you. Thank you everyone for your
Thank you,
time.
thank you, Aishwarya. So the two key points that she has made are that we need sound sectoral strategies and a good uh, methodology for measuring the SDG linkage between the action plans and the SDGs. And there is a methodology on which Terry has worked, and Ashish has also hinted that GIZ has worked with some states. I think this will be one of the key areas in which we can work with some of the state governments in advancing their action plans. So with this, we have come to the end of this first session. Because of the paucity of time, I'll not go into the question and answer session at this stage. I'll leave it to Karan and the people who are going to speak in the second session to take up some of the questions and at the end of the overall program. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you for taking us through the first part of the day today. And, without taking any further time, let me invite Mr. Atul Bagai, who is moderating our next session, which is titled Success Stories and Implementation Challenges, around subnational action. So, Atul, sir, the floor is yours. I also understand that you have another meeting to catch at 1. So we would request you to stay and moderate it as long as you can, and then I'll ask Mr. Rashmi to. Thank you, sir.
And thanks, Rashmi, for moderating session 1 and for such amazing and interesting information that has come from the 4 panelists, which in many cases and perspectives was an eye-opener. And now we have a second session, Success Stories and Implementation Challenges. And I would have loved to be the whole session, but I have to go for another meeting, and I would request Rashmi to help me out and moderate the session after I leave. We have a full panel here of 5 distinguished speakers. And we would be having a good inputs on some of the success stories and implementation challenges that they are facing at a state level or at institutional level. Our first panelist is, of course, a very distinguished civil servant who has got immense experience, Shri M.H. Khan, who's currently the Additional Chief Secretary in Manipur, and he belongs to the IS batch of 1988. He has also held very senior positions such as Secretary and Principal Secretary, and now Additional Chief Secretary in various departments like Water and Sanitation, Environment and Forest, Urban Development, and Relief and Disaster Management. I would request Khan Saab to open the proceedings for this panel and also talk to us about some of the challenges and success stories from his state, Manipur. Khan Saab.
Thank you, sir. Very good afternoon to Sir Rashmi and Sir Atul Bagai and all the distinguished panelists. I have joined in recently, sir, around a month back only. So I have taken this privilege to also take the prior permission to join with this group, one of our nodal officer, Mr. Braj Kumar, who is dealing with the climate change action plan. And I was listening to the earlier panelist in the previous session also. And certainly, sir, there is a need that this climate change action plan should be coordinated very well. At present, it is thought that it is the baby of the Forest and Environment Department, though it is not. It is a global concern, and all the departments, all the stakeholders have to work, I should say, in tandem for this. And as far as Manipur is concerned, sir, I think here the state is very, very well aware and what should I say, concerned about the climate change action plan. We have already prepared in long back in 2013, and we are already working on it. And I have been part of this proceedings of this climate change action plan earlier in Uttarakhand also when I was there in government of Uttarakhand, so I had some exposure. And here in Manipur, sir, also the NGT proceedings are also there, where the climate change action plan is directly or indirectly we are concerned about the pollution and many other aspects. And as far as Manipur is concerned, sir, there are two success stories. One is about the model carbon positive eco village at Phayeng. Phayeng is a very model village which we have taken in the Imphal West districts. And the another success story about the pilot project with the JEF and UNDP we have taken about market transformation and removal of barriers for effective implementation of state level climate change. I would request my colleague Braj Kumar if he dealt upon the aspects of the success story, sir, if you allow, and the concerns, or I should say suggestions, which are there from our side, that we will come a little later, sir. Please.
So very good afternoon, sir. So in fact, these two pilot projects under NFCC and under JEF program. So under NFCC, sir, we are just adopting one village called Phayeng, and we are trying to have an integrated approach for the ecosystem services, to conserve ecosystem services by creating of the village knowledge center and by giving the traditional knowledge to blend in the modern knowledge. We are just developing the farm, mountain farming patterns, sir. And we have just introduced the SRI successfully, and totally we are converting towards the agro farming patterns, sir. We are just focusing towards the conservation of the land, water, and forest management by rejuvenating all the springs of the catchment, by planting of around 60,000 plants in the catchment area, and now it enhancing the water resources. So Phayeng is the only scheduled caste tribe, scheduled caste village which doesn't have any drinking water sources till now. But from this project, we bring it in success mode to make the water supply system from the springs. How to collect the water springs from water from the springs, and how to convert into the water supply system. This is one of the success story. And then, sir, another success of this action of this project is that we are developing self groups, around 22 self groups of the women sections, and we are trying to develop as a vermicomposting units to every in the households, and there's liquid manuring patterns to all the households. So these are some success story of the Phayeng project. Then another one project is the totally for the mitigation, climate mitigation approach. This is in fact renewable energy. We are very much interested to bring it in the public platform, but there's some huge barrier of the marketing. So the developers are very much reluctant to come down here in northern state to bring out the solar or any renewable activities. So we are trying to remove the barrier or the marketing pattern of the solar energies. So we have started to do energy auditing to all the government offices so that we can try to have some conserve of the saving of the energy. Then grid connected solarization has been started in the health institutions. And we have already established, we have already installed one model solar cold storage in one village. And now it is very interesting and successfully working now. And all the villages also wanted to replicate the same model. Then solarization in the public sectors, community centers. So now we are targeting to convert into convert all the old diesel autos, private autos to the e-rickshaws, so that we can have another more conservation of the energy. Then we are trying to support the self groups who are using the solar powers. So these are some success stories, sir.
Sir, I think the capacity building of all the stakeholders is very much required in the government institutions. And here in Manipur, sir, the women power is very much there at the village level or anywhere, sir. So that I think for climate change vulnerability very much can be harnessed, sir. And as I think I was listening to the previous this thing also panelist, The Forest and Environment Department, of course, is in the forefront, but I think especially in the smaller states, sir, if we take all the state action plans for real conversion into reality, I think the state resources are a big problem, sir, because many of the departments which are in these state action plans, they are not having the enough resources. So that point is also very much there, which has to be flagged, sir. Connection is
Atul sir, you're on mute.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, sir.
No.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Thanks a lot, Khan Saab, and your colleague also for this very succinct feedback and on challenges and success stories. And I think you've captured the essence of the strengths that are there in Manipur to use them and for leveraging them for the best advantage. And as you're aware, for Rashmi and for me, Manipur hold a very special place. We both started our careers there together and landed in Imphal the same day. And any support which Terry and UNEP can provide to that wonderful state would be very good for us also. Thanks for that. I would move to Maharashtra now. And we have Naman Gupta from the Department of Environment, Government of Maharashtra. And I would request her to talk about some of the challenges and success stories of Maharashtra. And in fact, Maharashtra has shown a very good progress in the implementation of its SAPCC, with key officials steering the process with guidance from technical experts, especially with regard to helping farmers at the ground level understand the impacts of climate change. And I think that's been an area where a lot of work has happened in Maharashtra. So I would be very happy to hand over to Naman for talking to us about Maharashtra.
Yeah, so thank you, sir. Good afternoon, everyone. I would like to thank Terry and UNEP to invite Maharashtra to share some of the success stories that we have from the state. I would just start with the challenges that were identified by various panelists during the first panel. So a couple of challenges which are, I think, are common to most of the states are have been already highlighted. So I would rather pick up a couple of 4 or 5 of those challenges and link it up or share maybe some success stories from Maharashtra, that how Maharashtra as a state has gone ahead and sort of to address those challenges and work out the solutions around it. So first challenge that was listed by the panelists in the previous panel was related to linkage of climate change with other sectors or other departments. Now this is obviously this is one of the greatest challenge for our state also. But what we have done is that once we had the state action plan, the first state action plan, which was approved and accepted sometime in 2014. After that, again, we found, I would just say that there was an implementation phase that started after that. During the implementation, what happened is that government of Maharashtra took technical support from the UK government, like GIZ supported some states, UK government supported some states. So Maharashtra was one of the states supported by the UK government through a climate change innovation program. Action on Climate Today program. So through that program, what was done, the first step was to really identify what are the, how to really tackle the challenge of establishing linkage between climate change and other sectors. So the Department of Environment, which is a nodal department for climate change, decided, okay, let's prioritize the actions. Let's have the sectoral climate action plans for 8 of the key sectors, which are highlighted in the first state action plan of Maharashtra. So we went ahead to the level of preparing sectoral action plans for 8 departments. Now these sectoral action plans are one way of demystifying the state action plans technicalities that somebody was mentioning, that we need to really demystify SAPCCs. So at the departmental level, work has already been done in Maharashtra through the sectoral action plan preparations. And going ahead, what was done that whatever 50 odd actions were identified in the state action plan report in the first phase were prioritized using the tool called climate change impact assessment. Again, that was a tool which sort of assessed all these priority actions based on their climate change relevance. So, for example, if you go to the energy department with 5 recommended actions which are there in the SAPCC, then they would just say that, okay, 5 of these actions are big actions. These cannot be completed within 5 years or 10 years, and that too in the state of the scale of Maharashtra, where it's like you have to implement in 36 districts. It's a vast and diverse state. So you need to have, you cannot really expect that departments would allocate budgets for climate change activities in one go. So first step was to really highlight that which actions are more relevant from the climate change point of view, which result in the more impact when it comes to the mitigation and adaptation potential. So we did this exercise, analyzed all the priority recommendations which are made in the state action plan of Maharashtra in the first phase. And now gradually next step, what was there, that okay, now identify what are the financing options for it. Financing options, when we looked at it and analyzed it, we saw that, okay, majority of the funding can come from the state budget itself. It is just a matter of really you redesign your developmental programs or policy in a way that climate change is given due credit. Climate change, the programs which are having more climate change relevance should be given priority when it comes to financing, approval of finances from the state. So this is how one thing that one way that we address the challenge which is related to linkage of SAPCC to financing plans. So somebody was mentioning about that funding thing. We need to have the second stage of SAPCCs have to have a clear financing action plans. Every state would perhaps look at it. Maharashtra has done it in the previous phase also, some bit of pilot exercises. Another important exercise to tackle this financing related challenge was to map climate change priorities as per the state action plan with the private sector priorities. So we went ahead and mapped these we started with the top 100 private sector companies, and then we brought it down to 12 companies who were really very serious to have co-investment in the climate change area. And we prepared a kind of a mapping wherein we highlighted that, okay, private sector is also interested to invest, but they are not aware of government's priorities, because at that point of time we realized that even private sector was not aware of the state action plan that was existing in the public domain as well. But so this was one of the stage where we went ahead and brought private sector and government together to talk about their common priorities and identify some of the projects that can be co-funded. And gradually we had a success in terms of having one project design in a manner where which is aligned with state action plan, wherein private sector is in money and government through its various schemes like MG Narega and other schemes is reimbursing the cost, 50% of the cost to private sector. So this kind of model is something which we are looking at scaling up gradually in this state. Coming to the financing related challenges again, somebody, I think Ashish was mentioning about having climate risk screening tools that can be adopted by the developmental financing institutions, banks, etc., for making their lending decisions. So I'm happy to share that Maharashtra has, for the agriculture sector, Maharashtra, with the support from Action on Climate Today, developed a FPC risk rating tool, which was adopted by the World Bank project and Government of Maharashtra project on climate resilient agriculture also, which Mr. Bagai was mentioning about the agriculture, the climate resilient agriculture project. They adopted this FPC risk rating tool wherein climate related parameters were integrated. So this kind of tool was shared with NABARD and with other banks also, who have been seriously looking at it and learning from the tool and seeing that how they can really adopt this kind of risk screening frameworks, which would help in allocating more finances towards climate relevant projects or programs. The last bit, which is very important in terms of really implementation of state action plan, is the institutional mechanism. So whether it's institutional mechanism for implementation or institutional mechanism for monitoring and evaluation, both have been looked upon by the government of Maharashtra very seriously over past couple of years. I would say that there is a long way to go to show the results and streamline the processes, etc. What Maharashtra has taken as a leading state, what initiatives they've taken is the first thing is that we have got our own M&E framework, monitoring and evaluation framework, which is wherein we have linked each recommendations of state action plan with the SDG indicators and NDC indicators. Along with that, this framework also has the provision of integrating information about climate change relevance of particular action. So this framework gradually will be integrated with the CM's dashboard, wherein whatever integration related challenges we have, that whether our climate change priorities are aligned with SDGs, whether these are aligned with NDCs, etc., those all challenges will be handled through this dashboard. Institutional mechanism, now coming to the implementation challenges. So wherein we have seen that, okay, at different levels, at state level or at the field level, district level, village level, etc., there are different tiers who understand climate change very differently. Their developmental priorities are different. Although state action plan may have a climate change policy or plan in place, but when it comes to this field level, it might get diluted because there are several reasons for it, that they may not be understanding, that's not a priority for them, etc. So what we are now doing is that we are thinking of having some sort of decentralized climate change plan prepared at the district levels. We will start with maybe vulnerability mapping at the micro level and then come out with the decentralized plans. In the state action plan revision process, now we are already commenced the process of revision of the state action plan, wherein we have very clear work plan that mentions that there will be zonal district level consultations, even if we are having the COVID situation, very bad COVID situation in the state, but we have devised a plan of holding these consultations at range with the range of stakeholders at all levels. So once we will be having a rigorous process of consultations, we will be identifying and sort of helping the districts in preparing their decentralized action plans on climate change also to tackle this challenge. Overall, political leadership is something which is very important when it comes to implementation of climate change activities. We already heard and we have already experienced that some states do not get enough allocations for implementation of climate change activities, or some state climate change is nowhere in the developmental priorities, etc. But in Maharashtra, what we have done is that a different model or different institutional structure that we already established 2-3 years back is the establishment of a cross-party legislators committee on climate change. This is Maharashtra Legislators Committee on Climate Change, which is headed by the Speaker of the Assembly and co-headed by the Chair of the lower house. So this is how we have the institutional structure in place to engage political leadership also in the process. And this political leadership is not like once the government is gone, the ruling government is changed, then this will be diluted. It has members from all the parties who are there in this state. And we have a leadership in the state, new leadership, young leadership, who is heading the climate change portfolio. So that would also support the cause as well. I think that's what, just to share in brief and quick. And I would be happy to answer if there are any questions. Thank you again. Mr. Bagai, you're on mute, seems.
Yeah. Thank you, Namanji, for this excellent presentation and sharing some of the best practices in Maharashtra. In fact, I think you touched upon some very crucial factors. Private sector, certainly considering Maharashtra being one of the heaviest industrial states in India, private sector has to play a very important role in any strategy like the climate change strategy. And I think other states also would be addressing the private sector involvement in their plans. I think of particular interest was also the district level decentralization plans which you're making, and also the risk rating tool which you have formed up. I think we'll talk separately also to get some more information on that. And I think you find point on the institutional arrangement and especially getting the political leadership is certainly a very, very important component of any state level action plan. And you're right, with the present young leadership, especially in the climate change department, Maharashtra can really take a leadership role. So thanks a lot for this, and we move on to the next panelist, Dr. Jatinder Arora, the Executive Director of the Punjab State Council of Science and Technology in the Government of Punjab, who would talk about some challenges and also the best practices from his state. And I also request Rashmi if he could take over the baton now and for moderating this session. I'll stay on till around 1 o'clock, but then I'll leave at 1. Thanks a lot.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for having me here. Am I audible?
Yes.
Me, am I audible?
Yes. Okay. You can hear you.
Yeah. So you would ask me to share some best practices, success stories, and challenges here. Beginning with that, we have our state action plan on climate change 2.0, the first draft we prepared. In fact, today afternoon only me and Ashish are having a meeting to discuss it. We are trying to fine tune it further before we take it to the departments for the second round of inputs. Coming to success stories, I'll start with a very unique one. In Punjab, we have science, technology, and environment under one umbrella. So I was really liking the background paper that you circulated, wherein you were kind of wanting inputs on how R&D can be integrated when we talk of climate change. So here we have, that itself, the mechanism of having these two under one umbrella, kind of itself, offers us the advantage. In this sense, as I said, I will be sharing a unique success story with you. On the demand of MSME of the state, we had set up a dedicated cell in the State Council for Science and Technology, which is the think tank of Department of Science, Technology, Environment, Punjab, and its technical arm as well. So this cell the mandate of the cell is to look at the requirements of MSME for the pollution control requirements and offer cost-effective technologies to farmers, as well as the requirements for energy efficient technologies. So I'll just share with you, as we call it a success story, the impact and the work actually done on ground in the last 3 years. And the cell was set up in 1992. I am not sharing with you the entire, the works we did in these whole years. I'm just giving you very recent figures, last 3 years, as I mentioned. The technologies we developed, for example, to mention a few, we developed technology for induction furnaces. Mandi Govindgarh is the steel town of Punjab. Similarly, we have Ludhiana, which is the industrial town we have. So for the induction furnaces which are in Ludhiana, Mandi Govindgarh, we came up with a technology called side suction hood technology, which was to cater to the demand of little advancement in the industry, wherein they shifted to little mechanical mode of feeding into the furnace. So we came up with this technology, and also we came up with the technology for zigzag firing in brick kilns. And similarly, for some technologies for forging sector, foundry sector, and so on, and re-rolling mills. So these technologies in the last 3 years itself have been adopted by 1,300 MSMEs in Punjab. And this led to very hardcore figures. Every penny accounted for in the figures not an ounce exaggeration. Once I've given you, this led to investment of 300 crore in the state in cleaner technologies, and led to the benefit to the tune of 334 crore. As I said, I'm giving you very precise figure, 334 crore benefit to the industry directly, because this is in terms of their saving in fuel because of the adoption of energy efficient technologies. And in terms of carbon dioxide reduction, it was 5.8 lakh ton per annum. Particulate matter reduction, 52,000 ton per annum. So this is the point I want to bring home here, is that if there is a mechanism to look at the technology requirements of industry and provides the requisite hand-holding to industry, this is the kind of impact we can have in terms on the climate. In terms of the figures I mentioned, in terms of carbon dioxide reduction, particulate matter reduction. So this was one success story I wanted to share here. The other one that readily comes to my mind is is handling the issue of paddy straw. Everyone is aware, paddy straw burning is an issue in northern states. The state is taking very, very proactive actions here. One is for in situ management, in situ incorporation. Two is looking at the options for ex situ management of paddy straw. And under climate change action program supported by Ministry of Environment and Forest, we had set up initially one unit to look at the techno-economic feasibility. It was say about 24 ton per day capacity. And as soon as we got the confidence, we've now set up the second demonstration unit, which is with 100 ton per day capacity. As you all would be aware of, bricketing of any biomass is not an issue, but when it comes to paddy straw, it's a mammoth task because of the silica content, the wear and tear of machinery. Simultaneously, we are, since this is an event hosted by Terry, I'll mention here, we are also collaborating with Terry and the institute in Hyderabad, which is on the metallurgy strengths on board. We are also trying to increase the life cycle of this machinery so that, as soon as the second unit that I mentioned is likely to be commissioned in a fortnight or so. As soon as we have this success on ground, the market-ready machinery is also available for others to follow suit, others to take it up for replication. So these two things, and thirdly, many of my speakers before me mentioned that how do we actually club it when we talk of my co-panelists from Bihar mentioned that we need to demystify state action plan on climate change. My colleague from Maharashtra was mentioning we'll have to have some parallel approach. I really liked her idea of having district level plans. We are doing the same in case of state action plans on, say, air, water, waste management. We are also having district level plans for that. But I would also like to share here that one thing which is a success story in the making, I would say, that almost all states now are having. For example, in Punjab, we have biodiversity management committees set up at all local government level bodies. For example, we have biodiversity management committees, BMCs in short. These are called at in all 22 districts, 150 blocks, 13,260 villages, and each district, block, and village has also prepared the People's Biodiversity Register. So our next agenda that we think of is actually aligning them with the first NDC. I always marvel at the sequence, the way the NDCs have been articulated. First NDC harping on the very grassroots level strength of India, which is to propagate healthy, sustainable way of living based on the values of conservation. So I think this is a mechanism which we have now put in place pan India, the strength of our biodiversity management committees, which if we take them on board for the conservation and align them with the state action plan on climate change, I think we have, as I said, a very beautiful success story in the making in alignment with NDC 1. The other success story that we have from Punjab is about the solar mission. The state government has a draft policy ready, wherein our target is to meet 21% of our power requirement from renewable sources by 2030. We also have in Punjab world's largest single rooftop solar plant in Dera Bias here. So I think that's another, and we also have the solar potential of 2,800 megawatts. So this is something which is worth emulating in rest of the parts of India. Other two projects which I feel are worth mentioning. One, we are implementing climate resilient livestock production system, which is supported under National Adaptation Fund Climate Change. This is a multi-institutional project wherein we have reached out to 3,000 farmers from 3 villages, 3 districts of Punjab. And here we are demonstrating climate resilient sheds of varying animal capacity, starting from 500, ranging to, say 1,500, so that the livestock dairy farmers which are into this business can, or the small farmers, can have the ready models for adoption. Under this, the advisories are also going to more than 4 lakh farmers in the state, the weather alerts, the livestock related advisories. So I think this is another project which is which has replication potential. I would say it's a very good demonstration project which is on field already. The other initiative that we are taking, my colleague from Manipur also mentioned about it, that we are offering the support for energy auditing of various buildings in Punjab. That's bringing their consumption low. I'll share with you that we have this Virasat-e Khalsa, which is a heritage memorial. It was awarded by the state government for implementing the energy conservation measures that were recommended through energy auditing. Similarly, we have Science City here in Punjab. It received the 2nd national award for implementing the energy conservation measures. So this was, and also while I was talking about the paddy straw management, we have one program for diversification from paddy straw to maize and other crops, which is again funded under National Adaptation Fund on Climate Change. We are taking around 10,000 plus area for diversification under that. And similarly, we have 6 power plants, biomass-based power plants in Punjab, which are handling about 1 lakh tons of paddy straw. So these were about some demonstrations, some success stories. Then, one or two thoughts came to me while I was reading your background paper that you circulated. Funding, the finance part was an aspect mentioned there. In fact, this has been a major challenge because when we drafted SAPCC 1.0, therein the impression that flew right, percolated right from the national level to the states was that we come up with our funding requirements, because at that time we were very optimistic that there would be climate finance available from international bodies. So our departments came forward. They really spelled out what all they would require. But then I would say there was kind of disappointment. They only say 1 or 2 projects got funded. There are many in the pipeline waiting. So finance is definitely a challenge that needs to be looked at. So I think for that, private sector can be mobilized. For example, India's our new national science, technology, innovation policy also stresses a lot on mobilizing support from private sector, say for R&D. Here also, I would echo the same viewpoint that for climate change also we need to really mobilize private sector. The paddy straw bricketing units that I mentioned, these are in public-private partnership mode. The other aspect of this also comes to my mind, that is there is now a provision for corporate environmental responsibility. When when the states give environment clearance as per the directive of Ministry of Environment and Forest, the guidelines issued, there is this corporate environment responsibility aspect to it, which needs to be really monetized for benefit of our climate action plans. And also we need to mobilize startups. There has to be some kind of mechanism flowing from the central level to kind of encourage the startups which work in these domains. And the other thought that comes to my mind, because you asked about synergies, you asked about the agenda notes that you circulated, how do we bring our institutions, how do we bring our departments on board? So I suggest that if it at the national level we take a decision that every development department, every research institution, every university has a climate change cell or climate change team or whatever nomenclature we may follow for it. If we kind of take this decision consciously that we have, then I'm sure the research institution, then the nodal agency in the state level can interact with them, share national priorities with them, and then they can align their research priorities with our agenda. I think these are the points from my side. Thank you very much again for having me here.
Thank you, Jitendra-ji. Thank you very much for giving us highlights of what the Punjab government is doing in different areas to take forward climate change related actions. And the imprint of the Punjab State Council of Science and Technology is quite obvious in many of the projects which you have cited. Most of them have a science orientation, particularly about reduction of CO2 or GHG emissions, and some of them have great potential. I'm happy that we have pointed towards the potential of private sector participation in some of the projects which Punjab government is implementing. And this is indeed a critical concern in the state action plans, because the resources are always scarce. There is no ready pool of resources available for implementing state action plans. You have to either find enhanced budgetary outlays of the respective departments or some other sources of finance. So it will be key, and the institutional mechanisms and the resource generation process will really determine the success of the state action plans. Thank you very much for your comments. Now, the next speaker before us is Mr. Daniel Bradley from the British High Commission. He is an expert on sustainable energy, and he has been leading the energy and low carbon team at the British High Commission since 2016. In fact, he has had an exposure to India earlier. He has been based in Delhi since 2013. And earlier also, he has led the UK government initiatives about sustainable innovations in the entire region of South Asia and Africa. So he is contributing to the India-UK Energy for Growth Partnership, and we have great hope from the cooperation between India and the UK in the area of energy cooperation, low carbon growth, and more so because the UK is currently holding the chair of the COP, I mean the presidency of the COP, which is going to be held next year. How UK government looks at the involvement of the subnational agencies in advancing climate actions in different countries is something which we would all be interested to learn and listen from to you. Mr. Bradley, over to you.
Thank you so much. And many thanks to Terry and UNDP and all participants. It's great to be here today. It's great also to hear so many insights from states and get some very useful and frank feedback on the challenges as well as some of the great success stories. So I'm very happy to offer some insights from the UK, both as from the context as working as a supporting partner for states. We've got a long history and a strong history of collaboration in both developing and implementing state action plans, particularly on the adaptation elements as well as in low carbon development. And also to reflect a little bit on the COP presidency, as was mentioned. So maybe just to start with that, in the run up to COP26 next year, we are certainly very keen to engage all actors, including at the subnational and state level, to make sure that COP26 is really a moment where the world unites and comes back together for clean, resilient recovery that delivers for people and the planet, because COP is not just about national governments, it's also about other actors, the private sector, civil society, subnational actors. They're vital to drive India's action to tackle climate change, to drive a clean energy transition, and to build more resilient infrastructure that is going to save lives. And that's why we're reaching out to a much broader set of actors, including at state level, so they can drive forward action, and particularly in 5 priority areas, which the COP president has communicated as being particularly important in the run-up to Glasgow next year and beyond, which is clean energy, clean transport, adaptation and resilience, nature and biodiversity, recognizing we have the important links with the biodiversity COP next year, and the 5th one being finance, because we ultimately have to pay for it all. So those are the big priority themes where we're looking to galvanize action, and certainly states will be vital in that action, because states are where the action is. Frankly, that's where innovation happens. That's where progressive action takes place. So that's why when we, for example, have brought UK delegations to India on climate and clean energy themes, things like electric mobility, like smart grids and many other areas, we tend to take them to states, because we want them to see what's actually happening on the ground. We want to share good practice. We want to learn together. We want to explore partnerships. And equally, we've brought many delegations from states to the UK to see how we're doing things, not just to speak to people, but also to have real experiences and see real things, because we're all trying to solve the same problems. So I would say, reflecting on what I've heard today and from what I'm aware of through the UK's collaboration, I'm aware of lots of innovation and action at state level. It's been really impressive. I mean, things that come to mind are some of the radical action we've seen to ramp up renewable energy in states like Karnataka, where the UK collaborated to help do the original project design for the Pavagada solar plant, for example, which has given Karnataka the highest state renewables capacity in India. And equally, places like Tamil Nadu, we're sharing lessons on how the UK's world-class expertise on offshore wind can be useful for the state as well as the nation. We have the largest offshore wind capacity in the world. We're very proud of that. But we think India could easily overtake us. Whatever India does, it does at such pace and scale, it makes us look like a pilot. And we think there's a lot of potential for things like offshore wind in high potential areas like Tamil Nadu, like Gujarat, and so on. Another important area where we're working with states is on planning tools. We've worked with at least states like Maharashtra, Gujarat, Tamil Nadu, Karnataka, AP, to develop state-level versions of India's national energy security scenarios calculator, which is also at national level a UK collaboration with the government of India. And these state-level calculators are very powerful open source scenario planning tools to help state governments to develop plans and strategies for meeting their energy security and emission reduction objectives. And potentially, it's a very flexible tool. They could be used to help plan responses to COVID-19 pressures and for developing green recovery, as well as climate action pathways. So those are just a few examples of collaboration around cleaner and greener development, which offer multiple benefits, which we think are never more relevant as we all try and stimulate this positive, clean, resilient, and inclusive recovery from the economic pressures of COVID that we're all suffering at the moment. But as I said at the outset, it's not just about green growth that creates jobs and reduces emissions. It's also about tackling vulnerability, because this is the pressing issue that's actually facing us day to day. Implementing those parts of state action plans that will improve the resilience of systems, of communities, of infrastructure, which are already being impacted by climate-related stresses and shocks. And we've only to look at the recent impacts of cyclones in India, ongoing pressures from drought, from flood, to know that this is a very pressing reality. So our major collaboration here has been what we've called the Climate Change Innovation Program, but that's actually really about resilience, it's about adaptation, and it's collaborated with 6 states in India to help implement state action plans in the area of mainstreaming climate change resilience into sectoral plans, policies, and budgets. And really that aims to reduce people's vulnerability to climate change, but also reduce the huge expense of losses and damages due to extreme weather events. Because we believe that this is a very hard economic choice. It's not just about thinking about people. It's actually a very rational economic decision to say climate change is expensive. If you don't try and manage it now, it will become much more expensive in the future. And there's a very strong economic argument to take action. So the second very significant program in this area is our Infrastructure for Climate Resilient Growth program, ICRG. And in partnership with Government of India, this has helped to support state plans by improving the climate resilience of infrastructure works designed and built under the Mahatma Gandhi National Rural Employment Guarantee Scheme, so helping to make NREGA more climate resilient. And that's helped people build more resilient livelihoods through public works in areas like groundwater recharge, micro-irrigation, soil and water conservation, for example, in places like Odisha, Chhattisgarh, Bihar, Rajasthan, Madhya Pradesh, Uttar Pradesh. And following the success of this multi-year program, we've learned a lot of lessons from it, and we believe that there's a lot of scope to do more. So we're planning a new phase of that program on resilience. And as well as these large multi-state programs, we've also provided some specific targeted collaboration to actors like the Disaster Management Department of Government of Tamil Nadu to develop a roadmap for disaster preparedness and strengthen the climate resilience of coastal cities. So we've done some more focused work like that. But where do we go from here? What are some of the opportunities? Well, I just want to highlight 2 things. The first is called the Race to Zero. This is a program run by the UN, but on the 5th of June, on World Environment Day, we launched this Race to Zero, which is a global COP26 campaign to mobilize leadership and support from businesses, cities, regions, and investors, all committed to the goal of achieving net zero emissions by 2050. And this is really to recognize, again, that it's not just about national governments. There's a place for subnational actors. So this Race for Zero initiative is something that we really want to get behind. So please do Google that one after the presentation, Race to Zero. The second opportunity, which you can also Google, is a program under the UK PACT program. That's PACT, UK PACT. So again, put that into a search engine, you get all the details. But specifically, this is about to launch a Green Recovery Challenge Fund. So this is a multi-country fund that's looking for innovative ideas that address specific low-carbon challenges, that can show really measurable results, that can promote social inclusion, and really inspire future action to increase climate action at scale, while helping countries to rebuild their economies after the COVID-19 outbreak. And this is open, this is not open to governments, this is just open to civil society organizations, research institutes, private sector companies, The first funding window there will be launched in August for things like developing skills, developing new policies, creating knowledge, or strengthening networks of actors to drive action, amongst other things. So I guess in conclusion, I would say that there's been really positive action, but we need to do more because green growth is not just the right thing to do for people and the planet, it's also the economically smart thing to do to position ourselves in a low carbon economy, because we all know that there's no future for old style polluting, unsustainable pathways to development. And if we don't develop those low carbon economies and resilient economies and societies, we will be left behind, and we will be left with a very, very large bill as well, as we suffer from the impacts of climate change. So this is an opportunity that we're really grasping in the UK. We recently witnessed a period of 67 uninterrupted days of coal-free power, 67 days where we didn't use coal for electricity in the UK. And that's the longest period since the Industrial Revolution. And we've had many, many periods of coal-free power leading up to that. Our coal use is now practically zero. And it's great to see states like Chhattisgarh, Gujarat committing to no development of new coal, and I think many other states could do the same now that the economics of coal are so weak compared to renewables. Also, last month we announced plans for the world's largest offshore wind farm. It will create new jobs, provide renewable energy for millions of UK homes. So we're grasping that opportunity because we think it's the only smart way to go. And I believe that that's an opportunity that can be grasped at an even greater pace and scale in India's states to spearhead development and spearhead a clean, resilient recovery from COVID, because we just don't have time to waste. The climate emergency is very real, and it won't wait, for example, for the COVID emergency. It's something that we just have to keep momentum going. So we're just going to continue as hopefully a good partner to India's government and states and other actors. We're going to continue to press for much greater action, more collaboration to reduce emissions, to build resilience, and cooperate and support each other as we go along this path to clean and resilient recovery. And by joining forces in this way, I know we can make progress faster. So thanks for the opportunity to speak today. Very inspiring to hear all of the good action that's happening at states. I'm very mindful of the challenges, and that message that there are lots of like-minded partners, and by working together, I think we'll go further and we'll go faster. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Bradley. First of all, thank you, you and the British High Commission for treating the Indian states as your potential and good partners in your drive towards low carbon and climate resilient growth. And I'm happy that you have highlighted the dimensions of the climate resilience, the adverse impacts of climate change, which states need to handle, and they need to be strengthened, and their capacities have to be enhanced to handle these adverse impacts. So it's very, very critical. This is an area which states are fully engaged with. There is currently the pool of resources available with them is not very high, and this remains a major area of concern. So it's I really appreciate the way you have highlighted the role of some of the programs which UK government is running and which can offer this kind of assistance to scale up the programs. You have referred to the Climate Change Innovation Program, the UK Pact, and the Infrastructure for Climate Change Resilient Growth. I'm sure the state government participants who are here, they are listening to these. They have listened to you, and they will look at the potential which these programs offer in taking their actions forward. Thank you very much. While we have come to the end of the session, and we thank all the participants for their extremely useful thoughts. But a question which has come, Mr. Bradley, I think I would like to you to address this question in the context of given the fact that the need of resources at the state government level is very high in meeting the needs of climate resilient growth. How would you envisage the private sector participation, and what are the the various mechanisms which can help the state governments involve the private sector in a greater measure and enable them to raise greater finance to meet these needs.
Thank you very much. And thanks for raising the point about the private sector, because while governments and supporting actors can play obviously a significant role with the funding side of this, clearly there's no way that we will achieve our goals without the private sector. We just can't generate the kind of finance at the pace and scale needed. So I completely agree with you, and that's why mobilizing finance with a prominent role for how we mobilize private sector finance is one of those 5 key priority areas for action that the COP presidency has identified. We on our side, we are working with the private sector. We have done in the past on how to mobilize, for example, green bonds using the London Stock Exchange particularly, and there's been a lot of success there with large Indian entities like NAPCC and others who have raised climate bonds, millions now on the London Stock Exchange and other channels. These are some ways that you can help to inject finance. We're also looking at ways to use mechanisms like we have the Green Growth Equity Fund, which is a really nice example of where the UK government and the Indian government both put in £120 million equivalent of core capital into the Green Growth Equity Fund, which is there to try and mobilize investment into green infrastructure in India. But the role of that fund is to mobilize private sector contributions, and we recently saw a big contribution from BP into that fund, which is a great endorsement by the private sector that they believe that renewable energy, green infrastructure, green development is the way to go. So we've got mechanisms like that. We've also recently launched last November what we've called the Corporate Green Leadership Alliance, which is a coalition of coalitions, effectively drawing together private sector, industry-based campaigns operating in areas like energy efficiency, electric mobility, driving forward renewables, initiatives like EV 100, RE 100, and the ability of the private sector there to set targets and meet targets through their own peer support, trying to share good practice, look for ways to innovate and put in place the things that they need to drive forward private sector action. So those are some of the ways we're working with the private sector through investment, through these kind of technical assistance collaboration programs, because like you, we believe that ultimately business will be a very powerful driver of change, and that's going to be vital if we're going to reach our goals.
Thank you very much. Naman, if you are still there, there is a question which has come, which relates to
yes, I'm here.
Which is relevant for Maharashtra as well. The question is that given the fact that the Maharashtra government is focusing on the sectoral plans, how are you, if you can give a brief description of how you are approaching some of these sectoral plans, particularly in the transport sector, for example, where you need to make investment the climate friendly. So how do you plan to do that, and how do you sabotage the state action?
Okay, so basically sectoral action plans so far we have prepared are for 8 sectors which were identified in this first state action plan document. Unfortunately, transportation sector was not included in the first round of state action plan, precisely because the focus of Maharashtra government was more towards adaptation related aspects. This time, what we have done in the previous sectoral action plans, we are planning to do it for the other sectors also, including transportation, industries, and tribal, which are going to be the new sectors included in the second phase of state action plan. What we have done is we have sort of tried to simplify the language of climate change, climate science, vulnerability, etc., from the state action plan document and broken it down to the sectoral level. So in the sectoral action plans, we have tried to establish a linkage in terms of that if there is climate change. Now, what major challenge we face is that if we go to any department other than environment, and in some cases maybe forest department, they just say that climate change is not our mandate. Why should we, how are we related to it? So these sectoral action plans are the starting point which say that no, climate change is related to you also in so and so manner. So if there is a, for example, the climate change, heat, temperature increases, it have impact on energy sector also, like that. So we have tried to simplify that state action plan findings related to each of the individual sector, and then we have gone ahead in terms of really identifying what is the relevance of each of the recommendations that have come for that sector. So climate, I mean that if you are spending 100 crores through your programs, if transportation department or energy department is spending 100 rupees on particular program, then out of this 100 rupees, with confidence, you can you really say that all the 100 sort of rupees are going just for the climate change? Or you have a program which is named, which is under the renewable energy umbrella, but you really do not understand that part of it is contributing exclusively towards climate change, or it is helping in building climate resilience also. That type of understanding gap is there at the sector, and our sectoral action plans bridging the gap. They provide information about that. Okay, if you are providing solar pumps to agriculture sector, for example, it is not only helping towards economic empowerment of the farmers, but it will also help in terms of bringing in the share of green energy in the grid, which would impact which would help in meeting your targets of mitigation. So that is how we have tried to do in the 8 sectors. We will be doing similar way for transportation and other new sectors which are getting added in the next phase.
Okay, thank you very much. Deepak, I don't know if Mr. Deepak Kumar Singh is still around. Deepak, are you still there? But there was, I thought this issue of private sector involvement can be addressed by some of the state governments as well.
So Deepak sir is not there, sir.
Okay, okay. One of the questions which has come is, what is it that we can do about advancing the nature-based solutions? Can I address this question to Mr. Amish Khan if he is still around? How do you think that, to what extent can the state action plans focus on watershed rejuvenation, watershed management, water resources management, and nature-based or forestry-oriented solutions? Are they a significant part of the state action plan? What is your sense about this?
It's very of this climate. I think it is being taken very, very seriously, sir, in our state. There is a component in this our state action plan also, and we are converging it with our Manrega also. Manrega scheme, there also watershed management is being taken extensively, and IWMP program also, and under Kempa also this watershed management is being focused very much. And lately, sir, in the forest department also, with the help of support from the Germany, KFW project is also there, in which this watershed management aspect has been taken care of. And certainly, sir, it is a very pivotal role, and with the help of the local organizations, especially self-help groups and watershed management committees, and committees at different levels in the village level, the work is being taken. And here, sir, the role, and I should say the sensitization of the other departments is very, very important, which I think Government of Manipur has been able to address, sir. But still, I feel, sir, all areas are not being covered, especially in case of Manipur. Still, many areas are there where the watershed management has not been planned yet. And after joining the forest department, sir, around a month back only, I am in search that we can make a project for watershed management for all those areas which have not been yet covered under IWMP or under KFW and other sorts of funding, sir. So for that, sir, I am looking forward. In case you can help us, sir, we would be grateful, because you know the whole thing. You have been the chief secretary here earlier, and you have passed your maximum time of your career here. For the watershed management, sir, we want to take up a big project through some lateral funding. And this will be very crucial, sir, because in Manipur, sir, this watershed management is important for catchment areas treatment, because a lot of tree fellings have taken place, poppy cultivation has taken place. Even we are now focusing on the policy for jhum cultivation, sir. And recently, sir, we have moved a note to the cabinet that forest department can be the nodal department, so that climate change because of jhuming also is very much being affected, sir. So we would look forward, sir, for Terry as well as for support that some lateral funding can be there, and we will be preparing a project very soon, sir, for this remaining areas for watershed.
Thank you, Mamoon. These are certainly very important areas, and I'm glad to see that the state government is fully concerned about this, and they are thinking of initiating certain specific projects in this area. Thank you very much. With this, we have now come to the end of the very, very enlightening session, and there has been a rich exchange of ideas, and we have learned a lot from the state government participants, representatives, who have told us about some of the initiatives that they are taking, some of the concerns which they have, some of the new areas where they have broken a path. Different state governments have different priorities. It is only natural to expect. In some cases, the state governments are grappling with the resource issue. In some cases, they have institutional coordination issues. In some cases, they have the policy issue. In fact, the realization that climate change is a significant, not just a significant global problem, but a problem which needs to be handled at the local level. This itself is a consciousness which has to seep into the policy making process. So there are different issues in different states, and they're all at different levels of engagement at this stage. But some of the key issues are clear, that there are issues of institutional mechanisms, there are issues of outcome-based financing, private sector participation, sectoral planning process, and at the end of it all, the monitoring and evaluation, which will help move the resources, proceed in a particular direction, and achieve the deliverables. We have, I'm thankful to all the panelists who have shared their insights with us. We thank them for their patience with us because we have, I think, gone beyond the time schedule which was given to us. So once again, I thank everyone who has been with us in these two sessions. And now I'll hand it over to Divya.
Divya will give a closing remarks.
To her, give us her final words.
Mr. Rashmi, can you all hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Divya, yeah.
Okay. So thank you very much, Mr. Rashmi. I really don't need to say anything more after Mr. Rashmi has spoken. I think he's very captured the essence. I only say that it's actually evident from what we've heard and from what we know that subnational actors, including states, I would say even cities, have a very important role to play on the climate agenda if we are to achieve the kind of emission reduction and resilience that is required. To give you a sense, UNEP's emissions gap report of 2019 estimated that we need about 7.6% annual reduction in GHG emissions globally between 2020 and 2030 for a 1.5 degree goal. And interestingly, this is roughly the reduction we will see this year. We are expecting to see this year due to the worldwide lockdown to fight the coronavirus and the resulting and unprecedented decline in the use of fossil fuels. But of course, this is not the way we want emission reduction. And our effort must be to bring our economies back on track as soon as we can, while shifting to cleaner energy as part of the recovery efforts. And I think subnational governments will have a critical role to play in this transition. This role has been recognized in the Paris Agreement, and I would say has gained tremendous momentum globally post 2015. To the extent that we know in some countries, subnational and non-state actors are actually even more proactive than national governments. In India, of course, the national government has encouraged states to systematically develop and update their own strategy for climate action. And today we have heard some excellent success stories as well as some great ideas on how we can strengthen this work and importantly, integrate it into development planning, which I think will be absolutely essential. And as UNEP, we are very happy to work with our partners like Terry and others to continue our support to the states. So let me once again thank all our speakers and guests. A special thanks to all our esteemed panelists from the states who have taken the time to be with us despite the demands on their time in the current situation. I think their presence is an indication of the importance that they place on climate action as being integral to the development agenda of their states. And this linkage is something that the pandemic has actually only further underscored. So thank you, everyone. Thanks also to Terry for partnering with us in doing this webinar.
Divya, I think I request you to recognize also the presence of the Minister of Environment through Mr. Ajay Raghav, who is a participant in this session today, although he didn't raise any question.
Absolutely. Like I said, the central government has steered this process, and we are really sort of grateful to the Ministry of Environment and Forests for the great work they are doing and for the support that we always have from the ministry in making our own contribution to this area of work. So thank you very much to the ministry as well. Thank you. Karan.
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you, everybody. I think we've overshot it by 45 minutes. So I think thank you, everybody. And we'll close the session now.